Querida gente del mundo whisky, ya estamos en Speyside, comenzamos a recorrer toda la región y hoy nos toca Glenfiddich, esta emblemática destilería que nos tiene preparado un tour interesantísimo.
We can use only 3 things by law, so we're limited to malted barley, water and yeast, and that's it. You've hopefully heard a bit about our water already, so that's in film there. The water itself is the Robbie Dew spring flowing down the hill that you can just see through that gap there, so it's just across the road. The whole distillery was built here just to make sure we have access to that water. So it is now very uncommon to find a distillery of our size only using one water source from the start of production right through to the end. So anytime as we go around that you hear me talking about mixing water with what will become whiskey, that will always come from that one spring basically. And you can try the water later on if you want to as well, it's quite nice. It just tastes like water, but it's free, so take some home if you want to, make some whiskey with it. Well, maybe don't make some whiskey with it. That's the first thing. We'll come back to the yeast later on once that's used. What we use, I suppose I can say for now, we use one variety of yeast every single time called Mauri, so M-A-U-R-I. It's not only used by us, so Mauri is used throughout Scotland for making whiskey. There's a good reason why we use it though, so I'll come back to that once we reach the second step later on. And then finally, the barley. We're currently using about 100 tonnes of malted barley per day, so that's only in the very first step. We are a very big distillery and we are actually currently producing the world's best selling single malt whiskey as well, so we need a lot of whiskey to go all around the world and a lot of barley to keep us going as well. Currently the distillery is expanding as well, so we're doing about 14 million litres per year. We're going to go up to about 20 million litres per year, so roughly 1.5 times bigger, and you'll get the idea of that expansion happening as we go around as well. Hopefully you'll see a little bit of the work. Barley is grown in the field. It has to be malted and dried and milled, ground up. Again, we used to do all of this ourselves. Our malting stopped in 1958, again along with most distilleries in Scotland. It's now very, very uncommon to find malting happening at the distillery, although this is taken at Balvenie, very close by, so we also own Balvenie, and they will do about 10% of their own growing and malting and drying as well, and not here. So malting is more done to make the barley seeds grow, about 6 days on average. So the difference between this and this, so unmalted and malted, that it's grown for about 6 days and now has a little bit more sugar inside that you can use later in the creation of all the alcohol for whiskey. So that's the malt. The drying is more just done to stop the growing at the right time. If you don't dry it, it just keeps on growing. Eventually you're back to step 1, got barley plants. There's no use for it. Our barley is dried with very high quality coal. You can use hot air, you can also use peat. And I've heard you come across from the west coast on this travel already there. So you've tried all the whiskies where they use the peat to dry the barley as well. Very, very smoky, quite different from what we have today. So you shouldn't find any smoke in our whiskey, hopefully, unless something's gone wrong. Once the barley gets to us, it's going into our mills, just gets ground down and broken apart. And the ground up barley, the grist, is going into these big machines at the end of the day. So this is the mash. Step 1. What we're using here is just the first 2 things that you need. So the barley and the water. No yeast at this stage. Again, this is more towards the end. I think it's actually just finished as we spoke. You can see it now being emptied out at the end there. So we put 10 tonnes of grist, the ground up barley, into our mash tun. We spray some hot water on top, and as that water filters through, it just soaks all these sugars out of the barley, and that goes into the water. So the water is going in fresh, but draining away, very sweet, very sugary, very malty basically. So like most distilleries, we tend to do this in 3 different stages. So 3 waters go in, they get a little bit hotter as they go. So we're doing about 65 degrees to start with, by the end, it's almost at 90 degrees. You can feel all the heat coming off the mash tun as well. The first two waters, once they drain away, are combined into this wort, so again, W-O-R-T. The third water is just leftovers. It's what you call the sparge. It's a great name. The sparge can't be used in step 2 yet, so that goes straight back in the next time around. That third water goes back in as the first water in the next mash. And again, very, very common thing to do in smoke. And just recycles your sugar back in. What's quite cool about Glenfiddich? All of these spent shells that you see at this stage, what you call the draft, that would normally go off to farmers, for example, for the cows or for the pigs. In our case, the draft goes to a biomass plant that we built about maybe 3 years ago, and that will produce a lot of energy for Glenfiddich, actually as our own distillery. This biomass plant is owned and run by the Grant family. Very, very unusual. But nothing is wasted. We'll see more of that as we go around. Our washbacks are not full, and they're filled up to about here only, about the floor level. And that's about 40,000 litres of wort coming in from step 1 that goes into one washback. And then we add some yeast on top, so around about 250 litres of yeast. And our fermentation will take about 3 days in total, so bang on about 72 hours. The yeast breaks down that sugar from step 1, and it will use that to make alcohol, carbon dioxide gas, and heat. We don't need the CO2, so all that gas comes out the pipe. The gas also makes all the foam that you see at the surface. And the foam does rise slowly as the fermentation continues. That's why the washbacks are filled only to here, to leave some space for that foam as well. You see here the motor is spinning as well. The motor just spins, cuts the foam, keeps it inside. So if you do press the red button at the wrong time, the motor will stop and the foam would overflow. So please don't press the red button. After 3 days, the foam goes back down. At the end of our fermentation, we have about 10%. It's a bit stronger than most distilleries. We don't call it beer at this stage. It's very like beer. We call it wash stage. We send the wash off towards distillation. That will increase the alcohol strength. Also, because our fermentation is longer than most distilleries, at the end you also get other chemicals forming that we call esters. You can smell the esters in this room already, like apples, like pears, a bit like bananas, and you should find that flavour in the whiskey at the end as well, from these esters, from step 2. So we choose that one variety of yeast to ferment for longer, higher alcohol strength, hopefully more esters, fruitier whiskey. So our distillation, again, a little bit more unusual than most distilleries that I've been to anyway. It works the same basic way, so it is double distillation, just 2 times in a row, and the alcohol percentage will go up every time. We start at 10% at the end of step 2. The wash comes across into our big wash stills at the back of the still house and gets boiled, and the alcohol percentage, once the alcohol has risen out of the still, goes up to about 25%. So 10% goes in, 25% comes out. The new liquid is called low wines. That goes across to our set of 10 second stills, or smaller stills, that we call spirit stills, and the whole thing happens again. Distillation 2 gets us from 25% up to about 70 or 80%, so very, very strong in this case. You've probably come across these names before as well. We break that down into the head, the heart, and the tail. The heart goes off towards the next step. The heads and the tails, in this case, the strong and the weak, go back together and go back into our small stills. And again, that's very, very common practice. What you'll see once you go in that's unusual is that we have twice as many small stills as tall stills. So we have in there 5 wash and 10 spirit stills. You'll see the spirit stills have 2 distinct shapes. One looks more like a lantern, one is more like a kind of onion shape with a little boil ball at the bottom. The low wines coming in from Distillation 1 are broken in half, and they go into one of each of these 2 small stills. And the flavours that come back out again after our second distillation are different. So that wider shape is more kind of estery, apples and pears from step 2, and that thinner shape is more kind of floral and grassy, a bit more kind of like green leaf. That comes back together into the heart at the end. So the heart gets a wider variety of flavours as well. Also, because you're breaking your liquid in half, you get twice as much contact with the copper that the stills are made out of as well. So twice as much actual purification happening as the alcohol goes up. So we have very, very small stills, and they are heated with gas fires as well, which is very, very uncommon. I think I only know of 3 distilleries in Scotland that still use gas burners. You would normally get from small stills and gas flames very oily, very sort of rich heart, but our spirit is very, very light in this case. And we choose the cut-off point for the heart to be quite high as well, between about 65 and 75%, and that gets us the very lightest part of this run. So even though we have very small stills and still use the gas flames, you'll find Glenfiddich spirit very full flavoured, but still very, very light and fruity in this sense. The main building, this one along here, was built in 1887. This was built just 2 years after, so 1889. So it is now 130 years old this year, which is not bad. We now in total have 47 warehouses on site, so it does take a lot of time and space to age whisky. The warehouses are technically shared between 3 distilleries, so Glenfiddich, Balvenie, just a little bit down the road, and also Kinninvie, kind of built onto the back of Balvenie. It is just over 1 million casks in total, and round about 140 million litres of whisky storing here. From here, almost 2 miles that way, so it's a lot. It's enough for all of us, hopefully. I reckon most of you probably know then what this is. It looks like water, but it's not. In this case, 63.6% alcohol, so cask filling strength. It's been watered down a little bit after distillation, down to the kind of natural cask filling, or normal cask filling strength. I'll put a little bit more in. I'll pass this around. It is very strong, I'm sure you know. It's safe to drink though, if you do fancy a taste. It's what you would have had in the past if you worked here, maybe, I don't know, 100 years ago. You came in the morning, you had your shot of the heart. Again, at lunchtime, you'd have an actual dram of whiskey when you went home in the evening as well. So per day you would have 2 whites, 2 of these, and 1 brown. So you come in, that's your kind of daily allowance, 2 whites and a brown, what they used to say. Not anymore. It's kind of a health and safety nightmare by modern standards. The same story was true if you were a postman as well. If you came to Glenfiddich a long time ago with post, with letters, you also got a shot of the heart. And Dufftown is built on 7 distilleries, or operates 7 distilleries. You can imagine the postman finishes his round and he falls off his bike at the end because he's had 7 shots of the heart already. Again, not anymore. What's quite nice about these though, all 5 of these whiskies start with this, but the way that we've used the casks gives you a huge amount of variety. Again, I'm sure you've come across that before on your travels around Scotland. This is the Glenfiddich 12. Nice, shiny new packaging as well. So this was released at the beginning of July this year, and it still has to have the 3 distinctive things: the green colour, the 3 sides for our bottle as well, and the nice stag logo, the Fiddich logo on the front there. So those 3 things make it undeniably Glenfiddich, even if that label is covered. This is currently the best-selling single malt whisky in the world, so quite a prestigious title really. Very typical of this part of Scotland as well. Very much a Speyside whisky, light and sweet and fruity, not smoky at all. And what you have here is basically just 85% bourbon cask matured whisky and 15% sherry cask matured whisky. Again, not too much on the sherry to keep the whiskey quite light. Flavours wise, you can see the flavours up on the wall here. The suggested tasting notes: fresh pears, oak wood from the casks, and some sweet vanilla going down your throat as well. So those three things: pears, oak, and vanilla. Really good for a 12-year-old whiskey as well. Good value, good flavour, not too sharp, not too, quite smooth for a 12-year-old, I find. This is our IPA experiment. This was released back in 2016. Again, it's quite an unusual whiskey, I'm sure you'll know, because IPA casks are almost never ever used for making single malt scotch. I think we were one of the first. In this case, we have matured the whiskey only in bourbon casks to start with. So there's no sherry casks used at all for this one. Again, you also don't get an age on the front. So I would put it round about the same age as our 12. Roughly 12 years in these bourbon casks, and then only 3 months in these seasoned IPA casks from a very local brewery, just called Speyside Craft Brewery. So they make a beer that they call Scotch Hop. They oak age their beer, and they send those casks that were used for the beer off to us afterwards, and we use that to finish off our whiskey. Again, very, very light. It's not rich at all. There's no sherry casks in there. And again, the IPA casks, they're not bitter generally, they're quite hoppy, they're quite zesty, kind of citrus flavours. Think of things like oranges, lemons, grapefruit, that kind of IPA flavour normally. But nothing bitter, it's still quite a sweet whiskey. Number 3 then. Have you tried this one before? This is our standard 15. Fantastic little dram. So we call the third one the Salida Reserve. And again, Salida is that Spanish word. They use that most often in Spain for their sherry. What it technically is a combination of 3 different casks. So bourbon, sherry, and also a little bit of brand new American oak, just what you call American white virgin oak. And we also use an unusual way of mixing the whiskey, what you call our Salida vat, which is up in warehouse number 8. So it works a similar way to the marrying tuns that I showed you in warehouse number 1. This is a very big mixing container. It holds about 38,000 litres of whiskey when it's full. It was built back in 1998, and since then it's always been at least half full with whiskey. So we normally fill the vat maybe once per month. The new 15-year-old whiskey from these 3 casks will go in, and the level will go from half up to full. The vat will sit full, maybe for a few weeks while the whiskey all mixes together, and then comes back down to half again afterwards. And what comes out is the next batch of our whiskey. But then the remaining whiskey inside the vat will have the influence on the next batch of whiskey when that comes in. So the flavour inside this vat is always growing and growing and growing. You should find whiskey in there, maybe 1 or 2 drops from that very first fill. Think of flavours: honey and raisins, quite sweet and fruity. So number 4 has quite a nice story behind it as well. We call this one Project 20 or Project XX. Back in 2016 when this was made, we had a kind of global team of 20 brand ambassadors, and these ambassadors are kind of the face of our company. They're whiskey experts. They were all called back to Glenfiddich in 2016, and they were shown by our master blender, who is Brian Kinsman, our 6th master blender. He showed them into a warehouse and told every ambassador to go around, smell the casks, and pick 1 cask each that they just found interesting. That's all they were told. So round they went, they smelled the casks. 17 ambassadors picked bourbon casks. Only 2 ambassadors picked sherry casks, and the last ambassador, I think the Canadian ambassador, picked a port wine cask from Portugal as well. So 17 bourbon, 2 sherry, 1 port. Whiskies were aged between 8 years old and 23 years old. Many were first fill, many were refill. So a huge variety of casks and a huge variety of whiskies. And Brian's job at that stage was to create the marriage. That's what this is. All 20 casks combined into one. A huge amount of flavours. It's kind of like, can you take 20 almost random casks and make something nice? That's what they did. And you see actually, they took all of their thumbprints, the ambassadors, on the front there, and they kind of merged them into one. That's what that is. We have the grand finale. 21-year-old for our tour. So this is, again, a little bit more unusual. It's not quite the same as our method for the 12. We do still start with our bourbon casks and our sherry casks. 21 years in both. What we do first then, after 21 years, the whiskey comes out of the bourbon casks only, and that gets finished off in Caribbean rum casks, in this case, for 3 months. And the final mixture is 95% bourbon finished off in rum, and then 5% comes just from sherry casks, basically. So it's the combination of those 3 things, bourbon, rum, sherry, and all combined together. You can see again the flavours up on the wall here. The rum will add some more of those esters in this case, tropical fruits. Think of things like fig, think of bananas. I can smell bananas every time. And the bourbon casks will add that very soft, slightly spicy, toffee flavours, sweet vanilla flavours. By far the smoothest whiskey in this mixture.
Maravilloso programa. En la cata hemos probado el 12, 15 años, el IPA de Glenfiddich, el XX, el Experiment y el 21 años. Fue una cata completamente exclusiva, solo para los miembros de la Whisky Malta Argentina. Gracias por acompañarnos.